Unitarian Universalist Multiracial Unity Action Council. I welcome you today to our spring convocation on the issue of racism in the age of Trump. And we will be having three noted speakers. I'll do a little introduction before each of they begin. We're going to be starting with Dr. Holt, and then going to Dr. Alan Spector, and then concluding with the Reverend Dr. Thandeka. And after each speaker, I will provide an opportunity for some questions and answers of that particular speaker. And then after all three speakers in time, we will also have a bit of a time for questions that might be open to any of the speakers, or other discussion on the topic. So as you might have said in the old days, and now is a word from our sponsor, the Unitarian Universalist Multiracial Unity Action Council. For those of you who are not familiar with us, who aren't our members or things of this nature, we encourage you to take a look at our website, which is www.uumuac.org, to see more about what we stand for and our various programs, recordings, all kind of other things. We have a periodic journal called the Mac Arrow, and if you would, consider joining as a member, we would much appreciate that. Those funds help provide honorariums for speakers, such as at today's events, for our monthly third Wednesday Vesper services, for various things. We have a multiracial unity sermon contest that's going on, and so forth. So prize money, etc. So helps fund our various programs. So we hope you would consider that if you're new to what we're about. Without further ado, then, I'm going to introduce our first speaker, which is Dr. Lanier Frush Holt. He's in the Ohio State University's Department of Communications, and his specialty is looking at the confluence of journalism, media, and social psychology. And he particularly investigates underlying psychological mechanisms that operate when audiences are exposed to race-related news media, and examines how this affects opinions, particularly regarding racial minorities, such as Black Americans. And we were looking for an expert on racism in the media because our media has changed a great deal over the last 50 to 60 years, and this has helped contribute to increased division among Americans. And poking racism and stalking it has been things that has been used a lot in recent years in our current age for political purposes. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Holt for his presentation.
Thank you, Alan. A few things. One of the things that's intriguing, I did a study a number of years ago on looking at the effect media messages have on racial perceptions. And a lot of people don't realize this, but racism has been going on and been promoted through the media for decades. One of the things that's perhaps the most amazing to me is when you look at the civil rights movement, for example, blacks were catching hell all over the country. But say, for example, if you were catching hell in, say, Ebot, Kentucky, just to make up something, a lot of the civil rights footage that we saw on television was strategically planned. And what I mean by that is if you were catching hell in Ebot, Kentucky, and you called, say, the SCLC, the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, they would feel some empathy for you. They might send someone out there, but that wouldn't be where the majority of their efforts were. Majority of their efforts would be dedicated to places like Birmingham, places where Bull Connor, Orville Faubus, and people would definitely have some response. So as a result, they would say, yeah, we're going to have a protest, say, for example, at 5:30 or 6 o'clock or 6:30, right around the news hour. So What actually happened was people's idea on race didn't so much change because the majority white population had this great epiphany and decided, oh, I suddenly realized these people were right and that they were suffering. No, it was what the research shows is that it's the constant depressing images of seeing black kids firebombed, dogs attacking people on the evening news over and over and over again that led to people actually changing their views. What's really disturbing is a follow-up study I did probably a few years ago found that what happens now with this whole age of, multiple media, you can see television 24/7. It's not the old days like in the 70s or 80s when, 1 o'clock in the morning, you just get the color pattern on the screen. You can watch TV 24 hours a day now. What often happens is, even with all this available information, the media don't change people's minds or even have a great influence on them. And it's not because media so much have changed. It's because of not, I should say, content of media have changed. It's with so many different media outlets, the public suddenly just chooses not to watch news that they disagree with. So, say, for example, people think, oh, yes, you watch MSNBC, you become a left wing liberal, you become a right wing nut job for watching Fox. That's not the case. In fact, what often happens is people are already, say, a right wing nut job or a left wing liberal. Therefore, they watch MSNBC or they watch Fox News. And in fact, when people encounter media messages that they don't agree with, it's like, say, for example, a staunch right-wing Republican so happens to watch, say, CNN or PBS, and they get information that's discordant with their views, they don't even process it. It doesn't even enter their mind. They reject it out of hand without even evaluating the claims. It's probably the beginning of what people call fake news. So, this whole idea that media will at some point be this great changer like it did in the 1950s, that pretty much can't happen now. And the main reason it can't happen is because if it's information you disagree with, you don't even watch it. So that's perhaps the most disturbing thing. And when you couple that with the reality that in the era of Trump, in wrapping this up, speaking about, because I want to leave a lot of time for question and answers, in the era of Trump, speaking specifically to the topic of, today's meeting, it's amazing to me how many people act as if Trump is some novel new person and he's bringing something new to the table. He's not. Trump has just put a spigot in that well of hate that has existed and just let it pour. And he's using the media in much the way that many despots throughout history have always done. You look at the Nazis, you look at Idi Amin, you look at what happened in Rwanda, they have always used the media. In fact, despots have a three-step playbook, and the first step is always attack the media. Because when you attack the media, very little of what people, especially now, know about the world comes from their firsthand experience. What they think and what they know about the world is influenced long before they meet the people and long before they meet or engage with the issues by the media, which is to say, long before you come across a person of color, you've seen on television what you think about us. Long before you come across a Hispanic, you find out, you see, and you hear what you think about them. And as a result, what you when you encounter someone, they're either confirming or dispelling your pre-existing beliefs. And oftentimes, my last point is those pre-existing beliefs about especially African Americans is negative. In fact, what we found way back in 97 is 1 out of 2 whites have a negative opinion about African Americans. And then when you bring in social media, that means long before you watch the news, you already have a negative view of these people, which is why when you watch, say, George Floyd get killed, or you watch something where Walter Scott got shot, there's a certain group of people that say, well, we didn't see the whole video. What was happening beforehand? As if there has to be, something that someone could do to justify being shot in the back multiple times, like Walter Scott, or to have somebody's knee on your neck for several minutes till you die. And that's because people are already predisposed to believe these people are violent. And we know this also because when you look at the people who have the most negative views of African Americans across the globe, it's not even white Americans, it's first generation Asians. And the main reason that's important is because unlike whites who say, for example, could come across an African American in real life and say, well, this person doesn't comport with what I've already been told in terms of stereotypes, and the same with the Hispanic. The only message first generation Asians coming from a country that's largely monolithic have about African Americans is from the media. Therefore, these messages being so negative, long before they hear, meet, or see us, they have a negative view. And that largely comes from media messages. And what we're seeing is Trump just using that to his advantage, playing the fear card and letting people believe that these people are dangerous, these people are violent, these people are taking your jobs. It's a very old playbook. And people are buying into it because it frees them from believing that the problems they have, the situation in which they find themselves, is their fault. It's someone of color. And that's being exacerbated by media messages, which builds on their pre-existing beliefs. I'm done.
Okay, well, that was shorter than I anticipated, but
Oh, I could go on. I just didn't. I know we only had an hour, but how
no,
much?
we have a 2 hour time frame for the
Oh,
so because we were aiming for a 20-minute presentation roughly by each of the
oh,
three of you.
okay. Well, I will continue then.
Okay.
I just didn't want to take anybody's thunder because usually when we have these things, people are like, "Yeah, we'll give you 20 minutes." They really mean they want to give you 10, and then they want to give you some extra time and various things. Also, moving on, one of the things that's perhaps so disturbing historically about this and in terms of how the media are represented, let's go back to Germany, which is what everyone talks about when it comes to, you know, how racism, media, and everything have been, used to promulgate hate. The very first thing Hitler decided to do was start attacking the media. The second thing he wanted to do is he wanted to attack the intelligentsia, the education system. In short, he wanted to make sure everything you read, everything you saw, everything you heard was basically the information that he wanted you to see. In fact, how Hitler learned how to do things against the Jews is he looked at the Americans' treatment of the Negro, and that was on which he based all of his efforts. You go fast forward to, say, Rwanda. They did the exact same thing with the Hutus and the Tutsis, etc. You look in the era of Trump, he introduced a two-word term that I had never heard in all of my years of working in media. I worked at the Chicago Tribune, I worked at the Indy Star, I worked at the Rochester Post Bulletin, and I've never heard the word fake news. And the reason why that mattered so much is because when you get people to doubt the information beyond their sphere of influence, you get them to doubt anything is credible except for the information they hear from you. And in fact, when it comes to media processing, there's this concept called two-step flow. And two-step flow processing means information doesn't just come from the media, it comes from the media to a notable influencer. And what that person says about the message influences what people's perception of the message is. In short, we look even say at the pandemic. The information that just come from the World Health Organization, the CDC, et cetera, to the public, and they believed it. No, it came filtered through Trump, who, if he said it was false, this virus is going to end, it's short term, then it influenced how people reacted to it. Now let's look at it through the lens of race. When Trump says during his opening speech, coming down the staircase in New York, that Mexicans, for example, some of them are bringing drugs, they're bringing guns, and I guess some of them are good people to be paraphrasing, then people think, here I am, I'm underemployed or I'm unemployed. Here's a person who's a thought leader telling me that, you know what? It's not your fault. It's not because of anything that's been done to you. It's because of these people. And then you hear that from the media repeated through Fox News. when you see it through the media, repeated through the Washington Times, and you see it through multiple channels, and it echoes with what you already believe, you'll tend to think, everything this person is saying and doing is justified. And in fact, what we also see is because of these messages coming from the media, is these people act upon it. We saw an increase in hate crimes in 2016 that we had never seen before. That goes directly back to the words of Donald Trump, according to the Southern Poverty Law Center. Moreover, when it comes to Donald Trump, one of the things that people also have seen, and this is really sad, is the number of hate groups actually started to decrease. And the reason that's a problem is because for years, the number of hate groups have increased. We have hate groups in all 50 states. But the reason it's a problem that has decreased is because of the language of Trump, because of the vitriol inspired by Trump. These groups are no longer outcast and have to create these splinter cells. They've become mainstream. So people start thinking it's okay. People start saying it's perfectly fine. In fact, people even go so far as to protest openly, saying things that before 2016 would be considered scandalous, rebellious, outright racist, and people wouldn't want to believe it. For example, we look at what happened in Charlottesville. What the Tiki Torch Army, as we have always called them, not even perhaps derisively, definitely derisively, they were saying things like blacks will not replace us, Jews will not replace us. That comes directly out of the language of Trump. Moreover, they start promoting things like the Great Replacement Theory. And this goes all the way back in American history to right after slavery. What they promoted long before, they had major media, word of mouth, and pretty much even the Pony Express talked about the idea that after slavery, poor whites, non-landowners, were going to be replaced, at least in terms of their jobs, at least in terms of their availability to work, etc., by poor blacks. For example, what the research shows is right after slavery, it's not like African Americans or Negroes, as we were called back then, just suddenly left the fields, went out, started their own business. No, we had no ability to read, write, because we need to know nothing except what the master told us. What they actually did was they had to go back to the landowner, Massa as he was called, and say, yeah, I'm just going to create a voice. Mr. Charlie, I would like for us to, we don't work for you, but we will plow this whole field for, say, $2. Then the poor whites would come and ask to work for the landowner. And the landowner would say things like, well, I would hire you, but we have these colored boys. You're asking me for $3.50. They're offering me asking for $2. I'm a landowner. I'm a businessman. It's nothing personal. Therefore, guess what? I'm going to hire these people. When that information started getting out, it started giving credence to this whole idea of great replacement theory. They're taking our jobs. They're taking our opportunities. Now we have mass media, and they're promoting this whole idea that these people are getting opportunities you can. This whole idea of DEI is actually anti-white. In fact, the whole Black Lives Matter thing, which was started on social media, is also anti-white. And what Trump is doing is he's using this very old playbook that has always been in place. Create the fear, spread it through the media, get people to believe it, and have them act upon it. As Voltaire once said, if I can get you to believe absurdities, I can get you to commit atrocities. And we're seeing that on a grand scale. We're seeing it to the point where people will listen, even if they're told they're being lied to in the media. Perhaps the most amazing thing about Trump is that very phenomenon that they will believe him more than they will believe even the facts. A few years ago, I don't know how many people realize this, but Fox News actually got sued for passing misinformation. They had to come forward and say, basically, they're lying to the people. And what their viewers essentially said in response was, no, you're not. And Fox News right now is the most watched cable news network. So you have a whole group of people who only get their news from Fox, a whole group of people who only understand the world via the fake lens of Fox. And now you even have social media with the misnomer like Truth Social, where they only tune into this. And Trump gets this megaphone to these people who are often disenfranchised, these people who feel dispossessed, these people who feel rejected, these people who will believe these absurdities. And they commit and believe these terrible things about people of color. It's very much like what happened in Russia, is very much like what happened in Rwanda, and it's very much like what's happening right now. We have a whole group of people who think and believe and have echoed in the media they watch, see, hear that they are somehow being marginalized by literally a whole population. Because if you include non-Hispanic whites, that's 77% of the US population. You have a majority of these people who think the reason they don't have the opportunities is because they're paying attention to media and a leader who's telling them that 23% of the population is doing them harm, despite the fact that the majority of the Supreme Court is white, the majority of Congress is white, the executive branch is white, almost every Fortune 500 company is led by someone white, yet they themselves are dispossessed. They are marginalized. And again, this is nothing new. This is something we have seen time and time and time again. And it is I don't know if I could describe it as a tragedy, but it is not a surprise. What's really surprising is how often people ignore the voices of dissent. I don't, if we were in a class, I would ask, for example, after the killing of George Floyd, how many people heard a ton of whites coming to them saying, "Oh my goodness, I didn't know it was this bad. Oh my goodness, I've never heard of this before." And what my research shows is that when whites hear about racism from black folks, and they even hear it from the media, they don't even process it. In fact, a lot of times they think of it as complaining. However, when they hear this information from whites who've never experienced it, never actually knew about it, never actually had to, address it because it doesn't affect them, they view that as information. And what it told me and what it told a lot of blacks is that in all these years of us talking about it and all these years of it being in media, whites simply haven't listened to it. In fact, I even have a study that I published where it talked about blacks have been talking when police shootings got to be pervasive in the mid to late 20 teens. Newspapers were talking about, oh my goodness, has it been this bad forever? And black newspapers were saying, we've been talking about this for 100 years. So right now we have a reality with media where we have more information out there, but a whole lot less knowledge. Because going back to my original statement, people simply aren't paying attention. When they get the opportunity to listen to as many voices as they can, what social media, what television, what media in general have created is an echo chamber. Instead of people listening to all the voices on various topics, what they listen to are voices that echo what they already believe. So this whole idea about Trump and novelty and Trump and racism and possibly being different, new, and bad, or that we could possibly change it like we did with the civil rights movement, that's highly unlikely. In fact, it's probably never going to happen. Not again like it did in the 1960s. In fact, what media suggests and what trends are showing, it's probably going to get a lot worse before it gets better. Because while we think we have a ton of different media outlets and networks, we don't. What we have is about 6 or 7 voices that own most of the media outlets, which you'll see during the Olympics, for example. When you see, oh, the news, the networks, they're showing swimming on ABC, they're showing it on Bravo, they're showing it on such and such. Wow, these networks got together. They didn't. they're owned by the same company. And when you have someone like Rupert Murdoch, who owns, I believe, I may get the number wrong on this, but at one point he owned about a quarter of the media. When you see someone with that much influence, when you see someone who is beholden unto Trump, spreading these messages of hate across various platforms, and people think that they're hearing it from multiple sources, they tend to believe it. And when they tend to believe it, we're not going to have any change because long before they come in contact with us, they are already predisposed to believing that we are terrible people. And that's not going to change. So that's all I have.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Holt. I'm now going to give us about, maybe 5 minutes or so for some questions of Dr. Holt, and before we go on to our next speaker. And again, at the end, we will have further time for questions and commentary that could be directed to any of the three speakers. So if you'd like to speak at this point and have a question, please raise your hand through the react button that you probably have at the bottom of your screen, so that as a hand appears on the screen, it will also get to my attention then, because otherwise I'm flipping between various screens to try to see everybody.
Yeah, I have see a question from, is it Wikoye?
Yeah, but her hand is open, so I'm going
Okay.
to give her the first opportunity to speak. Okay, you have to unmute yourself. Yeah, okay.
Thank you. It's also in the chat. However, I know some people are zooming in by phone and they might have a difficult time seeing the chat. What you are talking about is something informally I have noticed, and I have noticed it in people who I deeply respect and love, including family members, an ability to be completely rejecting of facts for the word of the Messiah, and the Messiah's word comes through the elected few, whoever those might be, and if it's different from facts in the situation, so be it, we will trust the Messiah. And that Messiah is building into resentments or losses or pre-existing ideas that exist within a local context. So the actual belief is framed by the local context, and then people are going out and finding the proof to support their existing belief through Fox News, through MSNBC, whatever their particular source might be. So those of us who are in this room who want to see change, who want to see us coming together as a global community to address the matters of global concern, like the degradation of earth, or brothers and sisters and siblings working together toward our common good, the change has to happen in the local context. The change cannot happen in Fox News, because in the end, MSNBC, Fox News, etc., are just an echo chamber, as you said, repeating what people already believe. So they might think their beliefs are being changed by the news, but in fact, the beliefs are already from the local context. So how do we, as change makers, enter into the local context to change the local context, which is where the site of the change must happen to actually create wider change?
That's a great question. The biggest thing we have to do is we actually have to start taking ownership of the media we can't control. And what I mean by that is we saw an example of that with the not Me Too movement, with Black Lives Matter. Before Black Lives Matter, the media operated in a three-part function. It's sort of like my mom used to say, our relationship works in three parts. I say, you do, the end. Well, the way the media used to operate is they report, we read, that's the end. Well, with Black Lives Matter, a group of Black women basically said, you know what? We need to counter the narrative of what the police say is actually accurate. We're going to start filming and we're going to put it out there. Therefore, we get an alternative so people don't automatically think that the police are always telling the truth. So what we have to do is start creating a similar thing, a groundswell on social media, because that's what we can control. We're not going to get hundreds of thousands or millions of dollars and create an alternative to ABC. Once we get something like that going, then, and we start buying into it, then we start creating an alternative narrative. We saw that work with the aforementioned Walter Scott case, for example. Walter Scott, for those who don't know, I believe was in South Carolina. He was a Black man running from the police. He got shot multiple times by a white police officer. Then he went back to his police precinct and said, yeah, I feared for my life. I had to shoot this guy. And the police believed it. So then somebody, I think it was a Hispanic gentleman, had a video of this happening, and he saw Walter Scott running. He got shot multiple times in the back, and the officer's black partner picked up some evidence, and they went back to the police station. And the guy said, I should turn this into police, but I don't trust them. Well, guess what? He was right, because the guy had gotten off completely, no pun intended, scot-free, and then he put it up on social media. Then things changed, and he became one of the few people to actually get convicted. I think he went to jail for like 20 years or life or something like that. And we saw the same thing happen with George Floyd. George Floyd was not novel. George Floyd was, we had a very similar situation. I believe it was in one of the boroughs of New York. A black man got choked out for selling loose cigarettes and killed on the streets of New York. And no one made a big deal about it. But the reason George Floyd matters is because it happened during the pandemic. People had nothing to do, nowhere to go, so they all got to see it on television. And because they saw it on TV, not surprising, Eric Chauvin got convicted. So we essentially need to start putting our messages out there on the platforms we can control and stop trying to focus on changing the media narratives on the major networks, because that's not going to happen. And that's pretty much the only way we can make it change.
Okay, thank you. Hideo, you're next. Unmute yourself. Okay.
Thank you. Thank you for your eloquent articulation, Dr. Holt.
Thank
I
you.
really appreciate what you shared. You mentioned the predisposed stereotyping by first-generation Asian. I want to say my grandparents immigrated from Japan in the 1890s, and it was a tough time for them. And I would say that that comment you made about first-generation Asians is right on. And even after World War II started and part of my family was interned for the duration of the war in the concentration camps, and my uncles fought in Europe. And when they went into Poland and to the camps, they were kept out of all the publicity pictures. They made them leave that area. So what I know is that, one, you hit the first generation issue right on the nose. And growing up, I'm a third generation Nikkei. It takes a long, long time for any change to evolve. And what I know is that my grandparents, when they were still living, their views and attitudes on race did not change. It took World War II and being put in a concentration camp for my father to open his eyes.
Wow.
But what I know for the Sansei, my generation and my son's generation, is that it takes a lot of education to relieve this ignorance.
Yeah.
And personal experiences. So
Yeah.
I just try to give him and expose as much as he can to the world that we live in. So thank you so much for your presentation.
I'm sorry about what happened to your family. And yeah, it's a tragedy. There's a theory called drench hypothesis, which talks about the fact that firsthand experience can overwhelm pretty much everything. And it's amazing to me. I mean, it's sort of a side note, and it isn't necessarily backed by the literature. It's more my own experience, I think, but related to drench hypothesis, one of the biggest things that changes people's perception is firsthand, like sports. And I don't mean sports like you're watching, to say the Steelers, just playing on a team with other people. One of my best friends is a white guy from Williston, North Dakota. We have nothing in common. I was born on the south side of Chicago, which is as black as Jamaica. And people would be surprised with how well we actually get along. And you see that a lot with, especially people of color, and a lot with race. And you're right, it takes a long time. What research does show is the group that it's hardest to change perception about is African Americans. One theory by one of my colleagues who's now at Syracuse found that changing the opinion of people born in the subcontinent of India is easier than it is at African Americans, perhaps because people have a much longer experience with negative views of us than they do other groups. So, but thank you for your question. I thought it was, and I think it's an excellent observation. I'll have to add some of that in my teaching, some of the stuff that you brought up.
Again, just a quick comment. you're right on. It wasn't until my brother and I excelled in sports through
Hmm.
junior high and high school that we were accepted by the majority.
Hmm. I think Reverend Jack has his hand up, speaking from right outside of Annie Glidden Road in DeKalb.
That's right. That's right.
My sisters went to NIU. Go Huskies.
Oh, how about that? Small world, Dr. Holt.
Yes.
But it's a world that has seems to have defined groups in it. The No Kings marches.
Go.
I beg your pardon. The No Kings marches lit up the liberal community in America, but it wasn't new. We had marches like that back in the days of the Vietnam War, all over
Hmm.
the country. We've had marches like that for other causes. There's a reliable segment of the population that has these liberal values and favors human progress. But unfortunately, repeated polling seems to show that there's a reliable segment of the population, maybe a little over a third, that has watched Trump for 12 years now and approves of what he's doing.
Yeah.
Likes his racism, his murderous impulses, his stupidity, his crassness, his vulgarity. They see themselves on a large screen with a lot of power. And I'm wondering, the question this leaves me with is whether, after all these years of the civil rights movement and what we thought was progress, whether there's really any hope that the minds of this third of the population that are stuck in the past can be changed. What do you think?
First, I'll tell you what I think, and then I'll tell you what the literature speaks to. The literature speaks, well, first, I'll tell you what the literature speaks to. The literature speaks to the fact that the hardest thing in the world to do through media is to actually change your mind. Media don't tell you what to think, media tell you what to think about, which is to say, we populate the topics of conversation. So what people talk about is what we cover because, like I show in class pictures of like Taylor Swift, Kanye West, and other celebrities, and then I show a picture of Chief Justice Roberts, and I ask who's the first person. Of course, they know Taylor, they know Kanye, they know these famous people, but they don't know who John Roberts is. And the main reason is because he's not on television, even though he's much more influential than them. So that being the case, it is highly unlikely that we are going to change that obdurate part of the population. And what's the dirty, not so dirty secret about this is a lot of this directly benefits people. And to paraphrase Upton Sinclair, it's pretty hard to get a man to believe something when his well-being and his paycheck depends on him not believing it. So it's not just a monetary thing, it's making you feel better about
Having a
yourself.
good time? Are you having a good time?
Me?
Is it dry?
Oh, somebody else. But going back to the example I talked about post-slavery, that was an example about the planter class. What it did was it made the poor whites that are in the planter class, when they didn't have, say, money to feed their poor, I mean, feed their kids, they were poor, etc. It made them feel good about themselves, even though they were at close to the bottom rung of the ladder, that it's not their fault. So when you get people to believe it's not their fault about something, it's not just the monetary, it's the psychological. And changing that from literature is probably the hardest thing to get. And I sort of like you, when I hear Trump has done something unfathomable, and then you see, oh my goodness, his approval rating still stays at 33%. Who are these 33% of the people? What does he have to do? The answer is he can do no wrong. So the idea that we're going to change all these people's minds is simply not going to happen. Let's see. I see Julie with her hand up.
Mine is
Alan is
can
muted.
anyone see
So
me?
I think Alan, are
Okay.
you trying to talk?
Yeah,
I don't
Marie
hear
Cox,
her.
go
Oh,
ahead,
there
Marie.
he is.
yeah. So Marie but Julie will not be able to speak now, but can hold her question to the end because we need to get on to our next speaker. So Marie, you have the last question before we move to the next speaker.
Okay, I'm sorry, but my camera is not working. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, I just wondered, when we look at the number of people who actually voted against Trump, there were more people. There are more people voted against Trump than that actually voted for him. So I mean, so I think that, and you can see the millions of people who come out on the No Kings March. I'm wondering if I can't remember exactly what you said, but it seems to me that there are more people who, as Jack said, who are opposed to Trump. So I'm just wondering, what do you think about that?
Yes. Well, I'm gonna make it short because I don't want to take up anyone else's time. The issue, say for example, we'll just speak about the black vote, for example. The issue isn't, well, I mean, if you look at the number of people who voted against Trump, I think that's a big sign. But what's also a big sign is the fact that Trump's approval or his number of votes didn't really change that much between 2020, 2024, et cetera. It pretty much stayed the same. And I think a good deal of that goes directly to the black vote. The people that voted, say for the people who vote Republican, like there's a phrase where it's like the Democrats have to fall in love, the Republicans just fall in line. The Republicans are going to vote, period. What often happens with the media is, say, for example, if you find out that there's a candidate you don't like, especially the black vote, it's not that we'll vote Republican, we just won't vote at all. And that's what ultimately led to Trump getting elected, is that eventually people said, you know, we don't like Hillary because Hillary had that speech back in 94 about young black men being super predators, for which she never apologized for. So instead of going out and supporting her, because, you know, I think, in my opinion, she took the black vote for granted because blacks love Bill Clinton. They thought we love Hillary. No, we love Bill. So they just didn't vote for her. And the same thing happened with Condoleezza. Gosh,
Kamala.
what am I?
Kamala Harris.
Kamala Harris. I don't know how I confused those. They couldn't be more different. With Kamala Harris was that you look at Kamala Harris's history of being a prosecutor in California. California locked up more black men than any other state. So black men especially were just like, you know, I'm not voting for her. So yeah, Trump's votes didn't so much change, and there's millions of people who voted against Trump. It's just that they didn't get the sort of groundswell of the black population like Barack Obama did over 2 elections. And if they did, these Democratic candidates, they would have won, because the information that we got mainly from the media, especially about those two, Kamala and Hillary, was just their standard Democratic candidates. And they're not really so much done a whole lot to overcome our negative perception of them as black voters. That's what it seems like happened.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to move on to our next speaker, and that's Dr. Alan Spector. Dr. Spector has been a lifelong racial justice activist, particularly since his days at the University of Wisconsin. And when he was going for his PhD in sociology, he helped form the International Committee Against Racism, along with Finley Campbell and some others. And Finley Campbell was also the founder of this organization, the UU Multiracial Unity Action Council. And Dr. Spector was a professor at Purdue University's Calumet campus for 45 years and has continued to speak on issues of race throughout his career. So, Dr. Spector, you're up.
Okay. So many different things to touch on. I really appreciated so many of the insights of Dr. Holt. My philosophy about teaching and lecturing is to try to push things a little further. That is, people getting together and saying, I agree, I agree, I agree. That's nice. But when it's over, nobody's changed. So it's always good to be a little bit edgy and push things a little further. Although obviously we may agree on a lot of things in advance. I'll say some things, since this is a heterogeneous group, but some people already know some of these things. But specifically, racism as we know it in the world today did not exist 2,000 years ago. Why I say that, it sounds complicated, but when you study things like this, it's the same as saying marriage as it exists in the world today isn't the same as it was 2,000 years ago. It's not that complicated. In other words, sure, there's a lot of similarities, a whole lot, but the process of racist discrimination and oppression is shaped and changed fundamentally with some similarities left over. The dredges of the past always stick us with us in the present, but they've always been very flexible. And racism exists. By racism, by the way, I don't just mean like bad ideas in people's heads. I mean discrimination. And racism is actually not the best word, but I can't think of any other word. I've been trying for 40 years, think of a better word to describe the mistreatment of Muslims in India, or Arabs in Palestine, or Buddhists in Afghanistan, or we could go on and on. Jews in Germany and Eastern Europe, indigenous people in Mexico and in Canada. There's a commonality with that. Within the U.S. context, though, I agree with the previous speaker who said that there's something special about the way Black people were treated as opposed to some of the other groups. There's an interesting essay called How the Irish Became White, because the Irish weren't considered white for a long time. I'm old enough to remember when I was growing up, just for my first 8 years of life in the Northeast Bronx, and Italians and Jews were not considered quite white. You know, they were, but they weren't. And my own confusion about what to do with this fellow classmate from Armenia, like, well, was he white or wasn't he? And it's all nonsense, basically. The fact of the matter is that all these concepts get manipulated to the point where at one point it was illegal for white people to marry Chinese people in Idaho, Montana, but they were permitted to marry Native Americans. And I think it was Missouri, they were permitted to marry Asians, but not permitted to marry indigenous Native Americans. How do you explain that? Why were Japanese considered honorary whites in South Africa and Chinese were considered not white? Because I think the people at the top, and I don't want to sound conspiratorial, I don't think there's 6 people with an evil thought on their mind. I don't believe any of that. I do believe that there are, groups of interest groups that get together and try to figure out how to do things. And sometimes they stumble, and sometimes they agree, and sometimes they get away with things. But things are not utterly unplanned. Otherwise, everything would fall apart. The amount of planning it takes to build a skyscraper, my goodness, how much planning does it take to carry out a war? So I think that the racism itself, which is not simply limited to blacks and whites, but is basically fundamentally globally based on color. It's been shaped utterly by the development of capitalism specifically, because capitalism developed this tremendous need for cheap labor, and it had to find a way to divide people in order to extract more from some groups than others. This is not complicated. Look at what was slavery. The racist white slave owners had no problem having sex with black women, and in fact, with turning their newborn white babies over to a black woman for the black woman to nurse her with the milk from the black woman's body. On the other hand, if you taught a black person to read, you could go to jail for 10, 20 years, which is an interesting point, because if you think people are less intelligent, why do you pass a law saying they're not allowed to learn how to read? Obviously, you're quite afraid that people are quite intelligent and you don't want them to learn how to read. I think capitalism as a system has a need to divide up the labor force in different ways. And it serves two purposes. One is extra profits made by paying people less. This may sound radical. It's not that controversial. I mean, why do they go into other countries, to get cheap labor? And if you look at it historically, it's probably more deeply rooted in gender than in race, if you want to go back thousands of years, but it's certainly rooted in race now, very much so, or at least race as it's imagined. So while race doesn't really exist biologically, racism does. And a lot of people get confused when I say that. And I say, look, ghosts don't exist. But if you jump out at somebody dressed as a ghost and they're at the top of a stairwell and they get scared and fall down for a split second, and you say, see, there are no ghosts, that doesn't mean their broken arm is going to immediately heal itself. That ideas have consequences in the world when they're turned into actions. So I think that the history of racism, racial oppression, racial discrimination, and racist ideology has gone through different waves in U.S. society. But I think that the so-called golden age, if you will, basically from the middle 1950s until the early 1970s, was a result of the fact that the U.S. won World War II. That sounds like a stretch. But the U.S. won World War II. It did not have any competition globally. Certainly not from Russia, which lost 30 million people. Certainly not from Japan, which was bombed massive numbers of civilians unnecessarily killed. Certainly not from England or France or Germany or any of those countries. So the U.S. capitalists were able to make money hand over fist, and it was a lot of prosperity. So that when the working class, including the black working class, put forward demands for, we want higher wages, we want better health care, et cetera, the powers that be felt quite confident. And a section of the capitalist class, not necessarily the whole capitalist class, by the way, but a section of them said, look, it's worth spending a little extra money for social peace. So sure, we'll have school integration. Sure, we'll raise the minimum wage. Sure, we'll oppose discrimination in housing. We want stability. And I think that was what part of the strategy, if you will. And again, I don't think it's three people sitting in a room. You have to understand, I try to explain this to my students. There are not simply two ways to understand social change. Either everything is random or there's secret plots and conspiracies. The way actually things happen, and if you take a step back and take a deep breath, you realize this is what it is. It's trial and error. So you try something, or what's the expression, throw everything against the wall and see what sticks. There's so many ways of saying that. That's, by the way, that's how evolution works. It's not a secret plan and it's not random. It's trial and error. And trial and error helps explain a lot of things in the world, actually, so that there's not necessarily a plan, but patterns emerge based on how things bump into each other and interact with each other and change. And so it was that that during the 1950s and into the 1960s, that was the case. Now, it's interesting. In the early 1970s, this social scientist from Harvard, he's still alive, I guess, Samuel P. Huntington, wrote an article in Forbes magazine that I read when it came out. And he said that the main problem in the USA was that there was too much optimism. And there's a lot of evidence for that the rebellions in the city, there were 250 rebellions, mainly by Black people. But it's also interesting that I have friends that were in Detroit during what was actually probably the most important, the significant rebellions that had taken place. I mean, they had to turn airplanes around on their way to Vietnam and send them back to Detroit to try to put down that uprising. And I had friends who lived there who said black and white people mingled freely on the street. During the rebellions, even in the 1990s, when Rodney King was beaten in Los Angeles, the Watts Rebellion, the the number of arrestees by the cops in that over the several day period, black people were the minority. The majority were white and Hispanic. The idea that there is this sort of deep-seated anti-white attitude among black people is nonsense. That's not to say you can't find it. I mean, you can millions of people, you're going to find anything among anything. And then as Dr. Holt pointed out, the media will highlight that. The media will highlight these exceptional things. The media will play games with people. The media itself is split, though. They're not quite sure what they want. Part of the time, they serve one interest group. Another time, the way they're handling Trump is a good example. You know, they're crushing him on 1 minute, and then another minute they're saying, well, you know, but we kind of like his tax stuff. And it's a way of trying to keep him in check. When they couldn't keep Nixon in check, they dumped him. The way they kept Reagan in check, because he was going a little off the deep end, was simply to throw some of his buddies in jail, like Oliver North. So, you know, and even the they changes over time. It's not the Rothschild or a secret plot. It's simply, you know, whoever has a lot of money and whoever has different interests. And sometimes it's the companies like Morgan Chase, which has been at the center of things for so long. And sometimes it's these tech bros who have a lot of money, but their money is a lot of fake. It's a lot of fake money. That's the thing, because it's based on the value of their stock, which is a lot different than the wealth of people 100 years ago. Anyhow, what's happened since is that the capitalism globally is contracting. That's just a reality. Japan rebuilt, Germany rebuilt, Russia rebuilt their steel industries, the auto industries. They began moving into other countries. China rebuilt and, you know, expanded into other countries. And the result of that was stress on the U.S. capitalist system. And as a result, divide and conquer becomes more and more essential. I mean, it's always been there. Everything has always been there. But the question is, what are the percentages? What are the proportions? And divide and conquer has become much more intensified, mainly when somebody's under stress. When someone's under stress, some people rise to the occasion and do wonderful things. And some people go into a panic and they race for the door during a fire, which results in nobody getting out. Or they begin to fight each other out of fear and confusion. And I think that what we've seen developing actually since the 1970s, the late 70s or so, is more of that pressure, more of that stress. We see it even now with the way that Trump is mishandling Iran. You know, just completely misunderstood it. Because guerrilla war isn't just about hiding behind trees. It's about asymmetrical warfare, where you're able to, you know, Sun Tzu wrote this in The Art of War. You have one person attack 10, and then those 10 people chase that one person away, but the other 9 go on and finish the job on the remainder. In other words, hit the enemy in a weak spot. It's no different than setting a pick in a basketball game. They're all variations of the same thing. Find the weak spot and hit it. Now, there's been a number of trends since then, though, which are quite interesting to me. I mean, I basically taught for 46 years. I taught 18,000 students at a school that was probably 75% white, almost all working class. But working class included parents who may have been school teachers, but a lot of them had parents or grandparents that were steel workers till they closed all the steel mills, or many of the steel mills around here. I purposely took the job here, just south of Chicago and west of Gary, Indiana, right in a little pocket there. And what I've noticed is something interesting, which is both positive and negative. When I started teaching in the late 70s at this school, the discourse about race tended to be a little more liberal. In other words, we need integration, we need, you know, unity, we need this, that, and the other thing to do something about the injustice that the civil rights movement had exposed. but the personal relationships were more distant. I go into a class of 100 students, and the 12 black students would all be sitting together, and the 70 white students would all be sitting together, and the 15 mostly Mexican American students would all be sitting together. And there wasn't hostility, but there wasn't that kind of interaction. It wasn't negative, it just wasn't anything, basically. And I saw over the years interesting changes happen, which is on the one hand, the verbal discourse in many ways became more conservative because people bought into this nonsense about white people are being discriminated against. Not necessarily in an aggressive, hostile Trump way, but just kind of like, yeah, I think black people have gotten a lot of breaks these days. But on a personal relationship level, it's quite the opposite. Kids sitting together playing Dungeons and Dragons, kids holding hands, kids getting married. My class is across racial lines. Kids playing frisbee together, kids studying together, a Filipino nurse and a white student and a black student all studying together, hoping they can pass this damn anatomy exam so they can get into nursing school. And these are the kind of things that are going to be hard for all of Trump's bellowing to undo. They're trying. Now, I had an interesting thing happen my last years of teaching, which was.
And Alan, try to wrap it up fairly quickly.
Okay, during the George Floyd rebellion, I asked my students a question anonymously. Suppose a group of people are standing around saying Black Lives Matter, and someone comes up and says, well, all lives matter. How would you react to that? 80% of my white students said that would be a terrible thing to say in that context, which is interesting. In other words, they understood the concept of triage, that those people who have a particular need should get taken care of first. They grasped that. They understood that, which is very interesting because they have a strong sense of justice. But when it came to the question of affirmative action, overwhelmingly, including a certain number of black students, were against it. Now, how could that be? What's the common thread? The common thread is they have a sense of justice, fairness, and equality, but they don't understand any history. They don't understand that one group has been running a race with heavy boots on their ankles. And so to take those boots off isn't giving anybody a special advantage. And explaining that is important, but that requires knowing history. The last thing I'll say then for this now is that there's a very good book called The Sum of Us by Heather McGee, which she explains how the interests of white people, white working class, are bound up with the interests of black people. That was the foundation in which Finley Campbell created this whole organization, that white people as a group benefit. White people, at least white working class people, benefit when black working class people make advances and gains as well. And I could give 100 examples of that, from the open admission struggles that ended up letting more white students into college than had previously come, or the equal opportunity grants that then turned into the Pell Grants that allowed white as well as black students and low incomes to come in. But that the rise of this extremely reactionary, dangerous thing isn't simply based on the fact that the right wing controlled the media. It's because starting in the 1970s, they started going to churches and to PTAs and to block clubs and to sports teams in the community. And they built a genuine base with people. And it's that matters. I'll finish off with one last quick example. I had a student from Crown Point, that's a white town not far from here. And he said to me, oh, you should come and talk to my cousin because you explain things better than I can. And I said to him, no, you learn this stuff and you go talk to your cousin. Why should he believe me? He doesn't know me. I could be anything. All kinds of things can sound logical. The question isn't whether they're logical. The question is whether they're true. And that requires that you trust the person who's speaking to you, which sort of ties back into Dr. Holt's point. Who do you trust and how? And I've seen the main problem with young people is they are not flocking to Charlie Kirk's right-wing nonsense, but they're not coming to us either. They just don't know what to believe. They just don't know what to believe. So we can change that by using media, but we also can only change it through personal relationships and working together. Then when the Black and the Hispanic and the white and the Filipino students study together to pass that damn anatomy exam, that does more to help overcome racism than anything else that we could come up with. I'll just stop now.
Okay. Thank you, Dr. Spector. We're going to take a few questions here, but I really want to limit it to about 5 minutes so we can move on to our third speaker at that time. So if you do have a question for Dr. Spector, please raise your hand. Okay, I see Julie with her hand up. So Julie, you're on.
Yeah, I have no problem with people developing personal relationships that will help people stop being racist or start being non-racist, or encourage them in not being racist. And it really makes a difference if you're drowning in lies, and we actually are drowning in lies. I've done some posts in the chat. The one that it says before it, people voted for lower grocery prices, the peace candidate, and the deportation of violent criminals only. And many people did vote for that. There were some people who liked Trump's racism, but I think probably a lot more people who thought that's what they were voting for. I do totally agree that right-wing organizing and forming of groups goes far beyond media, that they've done a ton of infiltration into fundamentalist churches, yeah, sports teams, PTAs, colleges like Charlie Kirk. And I want to call people's attention to the fact that there are different kinds of right-wing propaganda.
Mhm.
The kinds aimed at people who they think could vote MAGA, vote for Trump, are different from the kinds aimed at liberals. And the kinds aimed at liberals are not to get you to vote for Trump, because they know you won't. They're to confuse you, to make you think, oh, well, I don't know who to vote for, so I won't vote, or to make you not vote for Killer Kamala, an expression which is both incendiary and a blatant lie. Vice presidents have no effect on foreign policy, no decisions they make on foreign policy. So she had no effect on anything that happened in Gaza during her vice presidency. So anyway, and also on social media, Nicki Minaj, there was an article recently, I'll post it if I can find it right now. She's got 18,000 bots magnifying her MAGA posts. 18,000. So this is a massive effort on both media and social media to push people to the right, or more importantly in getting Trump elected, actually, not getting people to vote MAGA, getting Democrats not to vote for the Democratic candidate is the biggest effect. Because if all the people that they got to not vote for Killer Kamala had gone and voted for Kamala Harris, we wouldn't have Trump as president today. So that's all.
Okay. I'm going to let Ellen LaRue speak, and then we will go on to our third speaker. Okay. Go on, Ellen.
Hi. Very interesting so far, both speakers. It seems like, there's a lot of work to do and conditions to create to help people personally and in their inner relationships not be racist or be open to unracist ways of being. But in addition to that, we also need to be sure that the system within which we live is set up so to combat racism. So how do you, like, my question is, how do you, where's the way of connecting those two, if you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, well, I think just to rebalance a little bit what I said, I use the example. I mentioned the example of the kids playing cards together, but the more profound example are the students studying together for an exam. In other words, there's some research that shows that just contact in general helps overcome prejudice. But there's much more profound research that says when people are working together on a common problem, that's a much deeper form of unity that gets built. And I think that that's partly what we saw in the late 1960s. And so, for example, at my school, when a young black man was shot dead by a cop in Gary, a black cop actually, we organized a protest in downtown Gary against it, which brought white and Latino and black students together. And we brought white, black, and Latino students to Chicago when there were marches in defense of immigrants. In other words, we tried to basically build a movement. I think that maybe the struggles against these data centers, certainly the environmental struggles, touch people from all different racial and ethnic backgrounds. And so making an effort to bring people together on issues like that, I think is really, really important. I don't have a lot of faith that the liberals and the Democrats are going to solve this problem because it's structural. That is, the system itself is going to continue to contract. We already have seen, I mean, basically, Clinton and Harris were to the right of Nixon on some of these policies. If you actually look at their stance on some of the things they came up with, especially Clinton, so that the whole framework is shifting to the right. The whole framework is shifting to the right, and I think that the softer wing of the capitalist class will stay softer and more gentle unless their back is against the wall, in which case they'll be willing to institute a draft. They'll be willing to call the federal troops out to the west side of Chicago. They'll be willing to do a number of these same things. Now, there's still an advantage in focusing on Trump because he's spreading this ideology in such a gutter way. And I think maybe 20% of the population is probably not savable at this point because I think that they're reacting to feelings. They feel cornered. And when someone feels cornered, they stop thinking and they just start reacting. It's not an accident. They're the same people who are often anti-science. And it's interesting that there's this unity in that group between people who are hyper-religious and people who are totally immoral and degenerate, motorcycle gang thug types who talk about abusing women and laugh about it. But I do think that basically it's a working together on common issues, not just being friends. Being friends is very important, by the way. I emphasize that, but I think working together on common issues and understand it's going to take a long time. That's all. There's going to be a lot of defeats. And so that's what it is. So you push forward. I don't know if that answers your question much, but I certainly don't think we can change things at the top. You know, it doesn't work with assassination and it doesn't work with elections, but elections can build a movement. And in that sense, working in electoral campaigns can give one the opportunity to develop a better understanding of consciousness among the people you're working together with.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Spector. Okay, we're going to shift on now to the Reverend Dr. Thandeka.
Julie, would you go away?
Those who are not the official speaker, please mute yourself. Okay. So the Reverend Dr. Thandeka is a UU theologian and minister, and she's the founder she's a small group consultant and the founder of Love Beyond Belief, and she's the creator and co-director of the Universal Connection, which is a small group project. She's written a number of books and taught at a number of significant theological schools and universities. I'm not going to list them for purposes of saving on time, but they're numerous. So, Reverend Dr. Thandeka, the floor is yours now.
Thank you, Alan. I left my job as an Emmy Award-winning television producer for NBC in Los Angeles to figure out what was going on in America. I could no longer simply divide people into good guys and bad guys. Even good guys, so I discovered, as a broadcast journalist and investigative reporter, do bad things. I could no longer make sense of human behavior, of human nature. The search for answers became my life's mission. On this mission, one of the things I've discovered is that racism is not hate, but trauma trolled. I'll demonstrate what I mean starting with a child's story recounted by Lillian Smith. Lillian Smith was born in 1897 into an upper middle class white American family in Georgia. In her classic memoir, Killers of the Dream, her autobiographical account of Southern life, Lillian recounted the story of a little girl named Jamie, whom her family adopted, and then abandoned when they discovered that Jamie, a fair-skinned white child, was actually Black. Lillian recalled her initial thoughts and feelings about what her parents had done. She said, "I knew my father and mother, whom I passionately admired, had betrayed something they held dear. And they could not help doing it. And I was shamed by their failure and frightened, for I felt they were no longer as powerful as I thought. There was something out there that was stronger than they, and I could not bear to believe it. I could not confess that my father, who always solved the family dilemmas easily and with laughter, could not solve this problem. I knew that my mother, who was so good with children, did not believe in her heart that she was being good to this child. There was not a word in my mind that said it, but my body knew it and my glands, and I was filled with anxiety." Lillian Smith now panicked. Kids, after all, are hardwired to align themselves with their parents' beliefs and feelings in order to survive and flourish in their household. And so Lillian described what she did to get back in sync with her parents' feelings. She said, "I felt compelled to believe that they were right. It was the only way my world would not fall apart and be held together. And slowly it began to seep through me. I was white. She was colored. We must not be together. It was bad to be together. Though you ate with your nurse when you were little, it was bad to eat with any colored person after that. It was bad, just as other things were bad that your mother told you were bad. It was bad that she was going to sleep in the room that night with me. It was bad, it was bad, it was bad." The special importance of Lillian's story I spotlight here is the shift in Lillian's feelings, from condemnation of her parents' behavior to self-condemnation of her own feelings for differing with her parents. What was going on in this shift that completely altered her mind, her heart, and her behavior? Survival instincts. The shift was prompted by the innate self-preservation systems of Lillian's brain. Children can't survive without support. Their survival is not a solo act. When that support is threatened, their survival instincts of fear and rage, these two innate self-preservation systems of their brain, are triggered to protect them when harmed. Trauma is their body's response to harm. The response is both a physical and psychological expression of injury. Here's how it works. The expression triggers your brain to manage the injury, the harm, and secure the survival of the rest of your body. So Lillian Smith's brain did exactly what her brain was designed to do as an innate survival strategy. Her brain stopped her from identifying the target of her fear and rage, her parents, because she had to depend on them to survive. Her brain transferred the target of her fear and rage to Jamie. It was bad to be together. It was bad that she was going to sleep in the room with me that night. It was bad. That thought, that transference system was Lillian's new narrative, and its target was the troll Lillian's brain created and imaged as Jamie. The major point here is that survival instincts made Lillian cut off parts of herself to stop the rest of herself from being hurt. For example, the canyoneering hiker Aaron Ralston cut off his forearm to free himself from a dislodged boulder in a Utah canyon. Similarly, a bear will gnaw off a paw to escape a hunter's trap. Both the bear and Ralston did the same thing. They tore off a part of themselves to save the rest. Survival instincts also make you cut off contact with sensations and emotions that, if felt or recalled, would prevent you from surviving in settings that abuse you. So Lillian clawed off her original feelings condemning her parents, and so too her empathy with Jamie, because Lillian's fear and rage were triggered. Her very survival was at stake. She would not survive if she lost her parents' support. Lillian's survival instincts kicked in as a fearful flight away from Jamie. When Lillian looked at Jamie, Lillian now saw her own fear staring at her, which also prompted a rageful attack by Lillian against Jamie. Because Jamie's very presence now put Lillian's own life at risk. Jamie was now reconfigured by Lillian's imagination into the face of Lillian's own rage and fear, which terrorized Lillian. Lillian now saw Jamie only as a troll. She didn't scapegoat Jamie. She transferred her own feelings onto Jamie. So when she looked at Jamie, she didn't see Jamie, but Lillian saw her own fear and rage staring back at her. This shift in Lillian's narrative at its primal level of engagement is not about racism or hatred. It's about trauma trolled. It's an innate self-protection survival strategy. This analysis that I am presenting to you does not justify what Lillian did as a child. It simply explains it in neuroscientific and neuropsychological terms. Her trauma was trolled, imagined, and narrated by her survival instincts. What my analysis can't explain, however, is what was out there, as Lillian put it, that made her parents traumatize, harm, abuse, injure two children, Lillian and Jamie. Here's what was out there, which is how this trauma trolling system began as a race story hiding a forbidden truth before our nation was born. It started in 17th century colonial Virginia, where social divisions were initially based on class, as documented by the American historian from Yale University, Edmund Sears Morgan in his groundbreaking book, American Freedom, The Ordeal of Colonial Virginia. Indentured servants of all colors were initially considered part of the same alien group, which the wealthy cast as so very different from themselves. The poor, two races, the wealthy and the poor. 400 years ago, jobs weren't shipped abroad, people were. Africans, as well as bedraggled and penniless Englishmen and women, were shipped to Virginia to work as indentured servants. These laborers, all of whom were called slaves, found common cause. Together, as Morgan recounted, they stole hogs, made love, ran away, rebelled against their overlords together. The wealthy elite introduced new laws to end this camaraderie and joint rebellion across color lines. They set out to breed contempt between the Africans and Europeans so that a united class war against the ruling elite could not take place. Their strategy was diabolically simple: create two new races, blacks and whites, and give one of them, the whites, special race privileges. Originally, people who worked for others, whether enslaved or freed, believed they had more in common with each other than with their bosses or overseers. The new laws put an end to that former feeling of camaraderie and connection. These laws, for example, made it illegal for white Christians to give any legal for white Christians to give any Negro or other slave who shall presume to lift his hand in opposition to a white Christian 30 lashes on the back, and required masters to provide white servants at the end of their indentureship with corn, money, a gun, clothing, and 50 acres of land. As a result of such legal changes, poor whites gained legal, political, emotional, social, and financial status directly related to the degradation of the status of, as they put it, Indians and Negroes. The result of this carefully crafted deadly con game made non-wealthy whites feel good as they were fleeced. The newly whited worker now felt and acted like a member of the master race, the wealthy. The reality, of course, was that the vast majority of the members of this new white race remained dirt poor. Worse yet, the new laws made the wealthy plantation owners and their government officials now appear as the saviors and protectors of white labor rights because they confiscated the property previously held by the blacks and gave it to the whites, which, as Morgan points out, was a highly effective device for dissociating the two. But the property taken from the blacks did not raise the newly created whites to the level of their wealthy masters. It simply raised them above the status of the blacks. These laws kept white laborers poor and powerless by turning their fellow black laborers, their co-workers, into their enemies and turning their exploiters, the wealthy, into their saviors. As a result, the white workers had little chance for steady economic advancement because they were now aligned with the wealthy who were hell-bent on stopping it, as opposed to being aligned with their fellow black laborers with whom they had power in numbers. The way white laborers handled their rage at the wealthy for exploiting them shifted from rebellion against the wealthy to racism against blacks. The fear and rage of white laborers were trolled black. Just as Lillian had shifted her rage toward her parents for abandoning Jamie to now fearing Jamie and raging against Jamie, the point I am making here is about survival in a traumatic, abusive environment in which you must rely on your abuser to live. The trauma gets trolled as a racial strategy. Trolling white American fear and rage has remained a racial strategy for 250 years. The trolling transfers survival instincts to false targets. These false targets and narratives are deeply ingrained in our societal divisions, effectively keeping us and our nation in cycles of misunderstanding and conflict. Donald Trump did not create this trauma trolling strategy. He mastered it. From day one of his first presidential campaign, Trump repeatedly told white American voters the American government and the vested interests of big business linked to it are rigged against them. Then he offered irrefutable proof himself. I should know, Trump said in countless ways, because I use that rigged system to get rich. Great showman that he is, Trump would then pause and smile broadly as the presentation of his evidence continued. His audience hooted and howled with laughter. Now I will use my knowledge of this rigged system to dismantle it and protect you, Trump crescendoed. The crowds believed him, went euphoric, and that energy helped get him elected as America's 45th president. Accordingly, when Donald Trump and his politicians repeatedly say white people today represent racism's victims at least as much as blacks and other minorities, they are actually referring to the distress and trauma pervasive in tens of millions of white Americans wrought in them by the negative impact of corporate business decisions and government public policies on their lives. Trump does not dismantle Americans' class system, its wealth supremacy system, but distracts attention from it by trumping its white supremacy system. Trump knows that the source of the endemic fear and rage he found in most white voters of always feeling it financially at risk did not originate with actual impoverished immigrants, DEI policies, Haitians supposedly eating pets. He trolls white Americans' financial pain with false narratives, with false targets, like immigrants and DEI policies, and then trumps the pain by saying he will protect them from the trolls by building a wall, banning immigration, conducting mass deportations, and outlawing DEI. Donald Trump did not create raging and fearful feelings of white Americans, but he revs those feelings up and then reference their feelings into safety, assurance, and hope. Using trolls and trump cards, the members of his audiences immediately feel better, which counts as irrefutable physical evidence and testimony that Donald Trump can make things better because he just made them feel better. No data, ideas, concepts, or criticisms can refute this visceral feeling of salvation reaching every rational detail. Trump's critics focus on the troll narratives like racism, sexism, homophobia, and climate change denial, and they keep trying to rationalize why Americans would vote for someone so rude and crude. It's not rational. It's about survival. What remains unacknowledged is the major source of the trauma Trump trolls: America's rigged governance system's bias toward the wealthy. If you are white but not wealthy in America, God help you, because that's all you've got, a prayer. Like the 17th century Virginia race laws that kept white laborers poor and powerless, by turning their fellow Black laborers into their enemies and turning their exploiters, the wealthy, into their saviors, today's culture wars and racial conflicts keep non-wealthy Americans poor and powerless by turning their fellow citizens into their enemies and turning their exploiters, the politicians funded by the wealthy, into their saviors. This trauma trolling system expands our ever-growing divides. The chasm keeps us emotionally isolated, and prevents us from working together for our collective interests. There is a bridge. We just have to untroll it. How do we untroll it? We do the opposite of stoking fear and rage, the opposite of triggering survival instincts. We create safe spaces to reconnect with one another. I created Universal Connections small group workshops for this purpose. Universal Connections creates safe spaces for reflection and meaningful dialogue using a practice we call pause, discern, share, reflect, and share. Pause, discern, reflect, share. Participants do not offer advice, but instead share personal stories about feelings triggered in them as they share insights and stories from their own lives. Empathy comes to the fore. When we create safe spaces to share our feelings and stories, emotions are transformed with compassionate understanding rather than trolled. Also, the more we share our feelings in a safe community, the more trust we build in each other and the more connected we feel. We uncover a key insight of empathy in community, which is revelatory, whereby we feel what others feel and we feel how they feel it. These neural pathways are our feeling transmitters. The result is cosmic consciousness, our true self, our whole self, not our ego. The absence of a physical boundary is felt as glorious bliss. In this place, the connections between ourself and other selves and everyone else are revealed, and we are encompassed by a pure, unconditional love. I believe this kind of connection can fuel a new era in America, an era in which we are no longer trolled, an era in which we finally come back together and use our collective power to achieve our collective goals. Please join us. Our next Universal Connections workshop series is Monday evenings in June. Register at universalconnectionsworld.world so we can untroll America together. Thank you.
Thank you, Reverend Dr. Thandeka. Okay, and your message is very much aligned with the thoughts of Reverend Dr. Campbell that in the founding of our organization. So we appreciate that. Okay, we have some time for some questions, reactions, and so forth to what we've just heard from Reverend Dr. Thandeka. So if you wish to, please raise your hand using the react button. Okay, Jack, you're first. You're still muted, Jack.
Yeah.
Now you're okay. Okay.
Thandeka, I love your framework and your analysis. But I have this question. Doesn't it really depend on extending the kind of experience that comes out of your Universal Connections workshops to the entire populace that's under threat? How can we get that 33% all enrolled in these workshops so that they begin to see that it's safe to form loving connections with the others?
Absolutely, yes. Which is why we create small group, Universal Connections small groups in congregations, in libraries, in businesses. We want to get Sanders, we want to get leading politicians to say to their people, get thee to a small group, so that we will have a bazillion small groups doing this empathy work, sharing, and in this way creating a ground up grassroots movement of small groups. This is how the religious right came to the fore. They created small groups. So your mega churches consist of billions, millions, hundreds of small groups. I'm saying let's do the same thing. Let's create small groups in which empathy comes to the fore, and then these groups together work together with other small groups for common goals. Sanders, in his book, Fight Oligarchy, mentions emotions twice. He uses the word emotions twice. He says, yes, that's right. Our communities are falling apart. We need some emotional support. So I'm saying to Sanders, that's right. Tell your people to get into small groups so the energy that surges with your rally isn't dissipated, but goes into the small groups, and it becomes a spiritual practice without concepts, but a way of growing communities one small group at a time.
So you're
So
talking about a
yes,
revolution of togetherness.
yes, it's a grassroots initiative. We have the numbers. The question then is, why is it that 1/5 of the American population, the Christian nationalists, control government? It's because they organize small groups. We're the majority. So we'll go to a rally, but then we have no other place to take the energy. Or we'll think that if we simply reform something here, that will serve to address the trauma that we've gone through to get to this point. We have not paid adequate attention to the way in which all of us are hurt. For instance, 29% of Black kids in America are poor. 10% of white kids in America are poor, which means there's 500,000 more poor white kids than Black kids. So you suppose you said to all of their parents, okay, let's organize together to protect America's children. Okay. But rather, we get lost in what was set up and designed for us, which is to enter into conflicts with each other instead of working on the common good to insist and demand a democracy that works for us all. We have to begin to say, that's right, whites are hurting too. If you are white but not wealthy in this country and you have a catastrophic illness, God help you. If you are Generation Z and you are looking for a job, God help you. If you are not simply not educated, is a high, past high school, but now you've got the degree, but you can't get a job. God help you. What we fall into instead is arguing rates of abuse versus numbers of abuse instead of saying abuse. Let's get together in small groups to talk about the ways we've been hurt and work on common goods. And that'll happen. I mean, this almost happened with Obama. It's just that he disbanded the communities that got him elected because he was saying, yes, we can. Yes, we can do this together. So everyone thought this is what he was going to do. One posters called into the Deep South to find out how his campaign was going, the first campaign. And so the poster said to a woman with deep Southern accent in the South, who are you going to vote for? So she said, honey, who are we going to vote for? And the poster, tell them we're going to vote for the nigger. Because they thought, right? They're looking for a way to unite us all. Small groups can do this so that it's a bottom-up movement in which we demand, as the American people, 80% of the American people, that we have a right to health care, a decent job, safety, on and on. When we're fighting over the crumbs on the table, you have 2 crumbs, I have 3 crumbs. La-di-da. Small group work. Millions of them. We are the majority in this country, But we've been trained to focus only on the trolls, the isms, which are huge, but not the impact that created those trolls. That emotional impact, that psychological impact, the trauma has to be addressed in its own terms. And in our small groups, these are not psychological groups. We simply tell stories, and we always start with stories of feeling absolutely delighted. People tell their stories, and by the end of it, you would think that you were at a conference of mystics because of what we have in common, our ability to empathize. And the more we do this, the more our empathy moves outward. That's a spiritual movement that 80% of Americans will get behind to work for our common good.
Okay, thank you. Let's go on to Mr. Vandermude.
Thanks very much. Can you compare your work to the Braver Angels?
Yes. The braver angels are doing their part to stop the violence in cities. What I'm saying is that if we, in the braver angels, had small groups in which kids were telling their stories. Here's what happened to me. No kidding. That happened to me too. We now have the foundation for building an actual grassroots initiative. That's the difference. I'm saying small groups are the building block. One of the unfortunate things that happened during when liberal religion moved away from the doctrine of original sin and blaming people who were doing bad and wrong because they were simply evil. So the social gospel movement, the end of the 19th century, moved away from that and began to focus on institutions, social institutions, and we're breaking these people. They said, if you change the social institutions, then you'll no longer have people who are, hurting in this way. What they did not do was attend to the emotions of the broken people. So liberal theology became, in this way, almost synonymous with social justice work. But the other aspect that still had to be attended to was the trauma, the emotions, which is what the religious right does. So I'm saying we can use small groups to attend to the trauma, not as a psychological issue, but as a spiritual renewal experience without concepts. Then we have the energy, all of these small groups, millions of them working together, so that when Sanders or Chris Murphy or someone else says, okay, groups, hit the streets for this reason, the groups hit the streets. We are the majority in this country, but we have not attended to emotional trauma. We have not tended to that because our mainline congregations, including the Unitarian Universalists, have not attended to that. So we have to learn to attend to that by actually experiencing it. And that's what small groups do. People are astonished to discover that they have this state of being that fills them with bliss, that makes them feel connected to everyone. They talk about love. I mean, I've done this at UU congregations. You would think we are mystics because of what we're dipping into, which is empathy, unrestricted, which finally becomes empathy with the world itself, incarnating itself in us. So a grassroots movement. Thus back to Weebox. Am I stating your name correctly, Weebox? When she said, "How do we go local? What do we do that's local?" We create small groups in our congregations, in our libraries, online, that simply get together once a week just to check in. And these groups work together for common causes.
Okay, let's go to Marie Cobbs next.
I have a question for Dr. Lanier. About independent journalists and how he, like, for example, there's Don Lemon and Joy Reid and several others. How do you feel about the independent journalists? Do you think that's helpful?
You're still muted, Dr. Holt. Do you want to take that question, Dr. Holt? You're muted.
Oh, I didn't hear the question. I was literally pushing a button to see if I could hear it. Could you repeat it?
Marie?
I was just wondering, some of the people who work for MSN and CNN are now independent journalists. And I was just wondering if you thought that that was helpful.
Oh,
Independent journalists.
I can hear it now. I think it does help in some ways. One of the things that's a problem with being a part of the system is we always say news is whatever the editor sees on his way in from the suburbs. And when you're an independent journalist, you get a chance to actually express your voice. I think it helps in as much as just because, say, for example, Don Lemon, I'm just using him as an example because he's been in the news lately. Don Lemon has tens of thousands of followers on social media. Just because he's no longer a part of CNN doesn't mean he's lost those followers. It means he has followers now where he can actually express his voice. So in a lot of ways, I think that does improve the likelihood that he's able to reach a better audience and bring about change than he does when he's part of the system.
I would like to pick up on what Lanier's just said because I was a broadcast journalist for 15 years, 14 years. The emotional needs of the American people are not met through even the finest journalism. We tend to overlook this as liberals and progressives, which is the legacy of the liberal faith tradition. We are not attending to the emotional needs of our people. As Ralph Waldo Emerson said, our congregations have become corpse cold. So I'm a broken record here. We have to attend to our own needs, not as a psychological, couch shrink thing, but rather as engagement. We are a siloed, isolated group of citizens, an epidemic of loneliness. Put us in small groups, and we develop the energy because of our brain to work with others to improve our environments. And that will only happen, the improvement of our environments, from the bottom up. Jerry has his hand up.
Yeah, Jerome Dancis is next.
Yes.
Oh, all right. Hi. All right. So that the bulk of the whites are in trauma, and it perhaps not as bad as blacks in this country. It's something that has been well, of course it's terrible, but it's been increasing tremendously in the past 40 years, where now the number of deaths from just economic despair by just whites has gone up by 100,000 a year in the United States. And where currently 2 out of 5 American adults cannot meet their credit card payments, which is basically a trap which puts them into economic despair. And when I think of, why did Trump become popular in 2015, but not let's say 1990. And one reason is that there's this tremendous increase in the number of Americans, black and white, who are in this trauma of economic despair, and they're grasping for straws. And Trump and Bernie Sanders were the only ones who were offering them hope. And that's why back in 2016, there were a batch of voters whose first 2 choices were Trump and Sanders.
Yes, I want to affirm here what you're saying and pull back on comparisons. Comparisons these days are dangerous because we compare rates of abuse with numbers of abuse. In the 60s, late 60s and 70s, there was a tremendous debate going on. Perhaps you can remember this, Jerry. Who suffered more, the Jews or the blacks? Tremendous, tremendous debates. So I began to say, okay, I will enter into this conversation when I have an adequate sample of Africans who suffered through the Middle Passage and then came back as Jews and suffered in Auschwitz.
Mhm.
I will say to them, which way did you suffer more? And until I have that adequate sample, I will not enter into that conversation.
Right.
Rather, we are suffering.
No, I agree. I do not want to do the relative.
Yes.
I do not
Yes.
remember-
So I'm trying to affirm
Right,
what you're
right.
saying.
Yes.
Yes.
I do not remember those discussions in the 60s. Although in 63 at the University of Wisconsin, I did organize a civil rights group that was but just as a bit of history. But I do want to say something about the media, and actually the New York Times in particular. Just before the 2022 congressional election, in that month, the front page of the New York Times emphasized crime stories and other stories that the Republican candidates were saying, and they neglected and they avoided the stories that the Democratic candidates were saying. They actually made up the idea that there was a crime wave in October of 2022. So, I think actually the front page of the New York Times tipped the election in 2022 so that the Republicans gained like 5 more congressional seats.
Yes.
by
Good. I will make my response short because I would love to hear what Wikoya is saying, because I'm affirming what you're saying, Jerry. I'm affirming what you're saying. I was in graduate school of journalism at Columbia in 1968, class of 68. And we talked about fake news all the time. We talked about the distortions. Eye of Stones Weekly. We realized we were being lied to. So today the right is saying what we were saying, 60 years ago. Wikoya.
Yeah. And this will be our last question. But go ahead, Wikoya.
I'm gonna try your name. Thandeka?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you for what you are saying and the way that you have communicated this message year after year for a very long time. I consider you one of my ancestors of the heart, and thank you. I have lupus, an autoimmune disease. I have it in every part of my body because I have antibodies to my DNA. So when a doctor asks me, where is it worse today? What hurts the most? I'm always flummoxed to answer that question because it is all over my body. It's in my blood vessels causing deterioration. It's in my reproductive system, damaging that. It's damaging my joints. It's damaging my neurological. It's taking my energy. I'm 47, yet I'm 80 and use a walker. So I cannot answer and decide which is the worst suffering or the worst pain because it is a whole system. And as a human race, we have an autoimmune disorder. We are busy attacking ourselves. And when we try to say that, well, the heart problem is the worst, that's the one gonna kill us, or maybe it's the foot problem because now I can't walk, it is a circular and waste of time. It is the people who are creating the argument, putting us back on ourselves so that they can steal from us while we are busy, confused, and arguing with each other. They are doing exactly what Dr. Lanier said, what Dr. Alan said, using different modalities. But they are only successful because we already believe, because we are already in pain. And they're giving us a theory to describe our pain and somewhere to put the blame for it. If we get back to our universalist roots, which say that we are all saved, and it's the welcome first, which has to be extended before we can move on with the aspect of building community and salvation, then we can build those empathetic connections that allow our bodies to stand down, to feel safe, and then be able to rebuild the trust in each other. And as it goes out in concentric circles to humanity. If we don't even have trust in our basic safety, we are busy looking for the boogeyman or the troll, as Reverend Thandeka said. But that thing cannot, it will be found inside ourselves, in our own ego damage, but we'll put it out to other people because we feel less than whole. We'll put it out that someone else made me feel less than whole. How can we feel whole? Through secure attachment. Even one good, secure attachment is enough to take us through. Look at some of the stories coming out of Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl, or people who have lived through horrendous pain. Even imagined connection, secure connection is enough to give the resilience to keep going. We definitely want more than that. But how do we achieve it in this time and age? We have to make those connections even with the devil, with the one we have put our troll on. As we begin to make a connection with our troll, we begin to see that the troll is our imagination. We do that through the shared storytelling. And then we shine that back inside our heart for healing, and we become healing of ourselves. It's this beautiful mirroring process. As we shine out the love comes back, and we become whole in our sense of self. As we become whole in our sense of self, we are no longer so easily deceived about where is the boogeyman somewhere else. The boogeyman is nowhere else. It is inside ourselves. When we stand together, we heal that autoimmune disorder. But how do we achieve that? Yes, the media is an aspect. It builds distrust. Mostly media builds distrust, not trust. The trust is built through those personal feeling connections that we have with each other. And
Yes.
Dr. Thandeka, I signed up for your thing, so I'm going to try to come.
Fabulous. First off, thank you for sharing with us what you're going through. Thank you. Thank you. I send you love and gratitude. Thank you. And yes, the entire system, this is a systems issue. This is a systems issue, which is why we're inviting you, Jennifer Jennings, Vice President of Finance and Operations, and we're inviting you to join our grassroots initiative, small group work, creating small groups within your organizations with others. We have an email address, connect@universalconnections.world, We're going to start a podcast as well. We want to start this conversation. We want to build this grassroots movement by attending to the ways in which we have been injured, so that empathy comes to the fore, which becomes a spiritual experience. Connect at universalconnections.world. Sign up for our workshop. Let's continue the conversation, because we are the majority of people in this country. We simply have not paid adequate attention to emotional bonding and empathy and healing.
With that word, with those words from
Alan, can I have one quick question, please?
if you make it short, because
Yes, very
I
short.
want
One
to
quick question.
respect everyone's time.
For any of the speakers who wish to respond to this, don't we need to get rid of this left, right, liberal, conservative bullshit?
That will go away. That will go away through the small groups. We don't work on getting rid of left and right. We put them in a small group. So if we focus on left and right, we're trolling. We're trolling.
Because there is no liberal or conservative way to have clean air that doesn't make me sick. There is no liberal or conservative way to have enough money to eat.
Or to pay, so that your kids can eat. Once you get them in a group, those divisions go away. If they're not in a group, then we're focusing on the trolls.
Okay. Thank you, Jack, for your question, and
wonderful.
Thandeka for your response. Respecting everyone's time, I want to particularly say thank you to our three esteemed speakers, and also for all of you for getting on and participating, either through your thoughts or your questions and everything.
Oh, Alan, before you turn the Zoom off, let me tell the 30 people who are still here, if you want to save the chat, which is full of useful information from today, bring up the chat, the button's at the bottom, and then up in the upper right-hand corner, you'll see 3 little dots. Click on the 3 little dots and you'll have an opportunity that says Save Chat. And if you click on that, it will save the whole chat to your hard disk. And then you can read it at your leisure. Do that right now before Alan turns the Zoom off. You won't lose the information.
I'll give people a half a minute to do that.
Thanks. And thanks to our speakers for a fabulous session today. Wonderful.
And Alan, this will also be put up on the website for future review.
Yeah, I'll be working with Reverend Trudeau. I've gotten a new computer since the last time we needed to post one of these. My old computer was having problems trying to do that. But yeah, he has traditionally been the one who has done this, but we're transitioning for me to do that. Yes. So I'll be working with him this week to accomplish that. And it will be on our website on the homepage, www.uumuac.org. And you can, if you scroll down to where it says UUMUAC YouTube programs, and then you click on that and you get the whole range of programs. And this will be whatever is the most recent program will show up first. So anyway, don't know exactly.
Thanks, Alan, and the board for putting on this wonderful program. Thank you.
Okay.
And thank you for the invitation. Thank you so very much. And hopefully we'll see you in June.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you. Okay.
Thank you.